My name is Peter Speake. I'm an English-born watchmaker, and I've been living in Switzerland now for nearly 30 years. I first met Max about 20 plus years ago at the Basel Watch Fair. My eventual role in the very first project with MB&F, the horological machine number 1, was a combination of touching on project management, overseeing the general development of the movement, the aesthetics of the movement, and I would end up running backwards and forwards from my workshop to the factory where the project was actually being developed. The main constructor was Lauren Bess. It was a very bold project. It was very unusual. It was very challenging, and I found myself growing a lot in as well. And I had done other projects like this beforehand, but none quite as, in a sense, unorthodox as this one. In total, there were over 400 components when you include everything from the movement to the dials through to the case. It was a highly complex piece. And everything was running pretty smoothly because the team that was involved were experienced. And we'd had a certain experience in this kind of piece before, despite the complexity of it. And then something happened which was unforeseen. The company that was producing the movement was purchased by their biggest client. And he was not driven to spend the energy of that company actually producing a movement for another brand. This reality was difficult to swallow. I was in the meeting with Max and the owner of the company when he broke this news to Max. And I remember literally feeling the color, the blood run out of his face, because this went from a relatively straightforward project to suddenly it stopping. With any startup, the very first project is the most important. And there were a lot of people waiting for this watch. It was going to define everything that was going to follow, and suddenly it stopped. There was a pothole in the road. We left the factory. We then got into Max's Audi. I think he was driving, and I was sitting in the back seat of the car. I started to phone up the different people, my different friends, tried to find a solution, to try to find people who I knew had the ability to be able to assemble this piece, and also who had the time and were open to be able to actually do it. Between the journey from the factory back down to Geneva, which was a good 2 to 3 hours, I managed to put a team together. The team ended up comprising of an American watchmaker, Irish watchmakers. There was a Finnish watchmaker involved, and that enabled the project to continue. Max has been in the business for long enough to know that there are words and there are actions and there are results. One of the watchmakers was Stephen McDonnell. The relationship then that was formed between Max and Stephen was then nurtured, and then years later, Stephen produced some of the most extraordinary legacy machines for Max and MB&F. The movement alone had in excess of 370 pieces. All the components were literally hand-assembled, hand-finished. The result kind of encapsulated what Max was trying to do. So you had this very unusual case, which was him on one side and his friends of the other people on the other side. The two would come together, and in the center you'd have the tourbillon cage. And the tourbillon cage, from my perception, was the representation of the passage of time. So you have time joining the dream and the goal of Max, combined with all the people who could actually help realize that project. In my early career, I restored antique and vintage watches in London. Some of those very early pocket watches or fob watches, which were sometimes quite small, were in the form of crucifixes, of skulls, of hearts. They were beautiful, very primitive in design and function. They had the same basic mechanisms as like miniature turret clocks, but hundreds of years old now. And the whole MB&F project, when it came to the execution of the pieces, always struck me as being a modern sort of interpretation of form watches. And to have been part of that, it was quite an extraordinary process, which I'm very grateful for.